All right, and we are on with State Representative Kevin McDugle, and you told me you represent a good chunk of Broken Arrow and several communities over there in the sort of the Wagner County area.
That is correct.
And we're on today to talk about a couple of really high-profile death penalty cases here in Oklahoma, but also the death penalty process in Oklahoma writ large. Like, are we doing it correctly? Can we do it correctly? It's been a while. Clearly, we've had some issues, and I know you've been working on a lot of this. And on top of all that, going to be on a nationally syndicated television show that a lot of people know about, talking about specifically the Richard Glossip case. So why don't we kind of start there and rip that Band-Aid off? You know, I don't like to send listeners to other media outlets, but Dr. Phil's a pretty big deal. And so tell me how that came about and what happens there.
Yeah, actually, Dr. Phil was aware of this case long before I was. He had Mother Mary Prejean, who they did the movie Walking Dead with Susan Sarandon, and Susan actually played Mother Mary. And right after that show aired, they learned about Richard Glossip, and they did a show on Richard Glossip 6 years ago when the death penalty, you know, he'd already been on death row 24 years and had his 3 meals that were his last meal 3 different times. And so anyway, they knew about it before us. And then 2 years ago, I got involved when a friend of mine brought it to me, and he said, I think we've got somebody innocent, possibly innocent, sitting on death row, and I want you to take a look at it. And my first thought was everybody on death row thinks that they're innocent. And so I really didn't know or hold much merit in that. But there's a show called Killing Richard Glossip that there was a series on that, and I paid to watch that series. And I thought, you know, if even 10% of this is true, it's possible that we've got somebody in Oklahoma sitting on death row that's innocent. And so I started digging in at that time and got a hold of his attorney and started reading the things that he has since Richard's gone through 2 trials already. And there's so much there that literally we could spend an hour talking about this case and what wasn't done and what's been done since then. But I firmly believe at this point that Richard Glossip's innocent and he's sitting on death row in Oklahoma.
And there are those who would posit he's not alone. We're seeing the Julius Jones case get a lot of attention nationally, internationally, and because of some of the high profile names that have sort of sat up and paid attention. And I got to tell you, there's another case where the killer is described as having, you know, kind of bushy hair underneath his cap. The police arrested this guy, like, I don't know, a couple weeks before, and his mugshot shows a shaved head. So, right. and something that just didn't even come up at trial, and yet this man's on death row. So there's some serious questions about that one. So what is your goal here? Is it to get Richard Glossip off of death row, or is it to take a much harder look at the process in general of how we condemn people in the state, or both?
Yeah, originally it was to get Richard Glossip off death row, but I've been involved in this long enough to know that we've got, I can't ever get an exact number, but somewhere between 45 and 59 people sitting on death row right now. And there's at least a handful, Julius Jones, Richard Glossip, that people believe are innocent, but there's no process in place right now other than Pardon and Parole Board to take a look at a case that's made it that far along and do a serious look into it. The majority of people on death row, we have no doubts. I mean, there's enough proof there that we know they're deserving, but yet there's a couple of them. And what mechanisms in place? Well, pardon and parole was created so that the governor wouldn't have to bear that pressure alone. They could point and say, hey, go over to pardon and parole and we'll let them decide. Well, you have 45 minutes when you go to pardon and parole during your hearing, actually 40 minutes, to present your case. And in Richard's case, for instance, I know it better only because I've studied it for 2 years. Julius Jones, I've helped them by writing letters on his behalf, but I haven't studied that case just because of lack of time. Honestly, there's so much wrapped into these. And but on Richard's case, I can tell you there were 200 witnesses that his now attorney has interviewed that were never interviewed, ever. And 27 of those have written affidavits stating certain things, like the guy who pointed a finger at him has admitted that has admitted that they set him up so that he could save his own life. And really, in this case, the only evidence they really have is the guy that actually committed the murder, and everybody knows he committed the murder, pointed a finger at Richard Glossip and said he's the one that coordinated it. And he did that to save his own life, so he wouldn't have to go to death row. Now he's sitting in life in prison. Richard's been on death row for 24 years.
Right. So
story once.
It was never alleged that Richard actually killed the guy. And if I remember, he was like clubbed to death with a bat or something. That's right. But supposedly the guy who did do the killing and admits doing the killing, and everybody knows did the killing, said, yeah, well, he made me do it, or he told me to do it, or he hired me to do it.
He never mentioned Richard's name until the police mentioned Richard's name. And during the police interviews, they told him, we know you're not smart enough to do this on your own. Somebody else had to coordinate it. Give it up. Well, our belief is, after looking at evidence, there were 2 sets of bloody clothes found, 2 sets. And the theory is that some girl got the hotel manager to get into the room, and then this crack addict janitor of the hotel, Justin Sneed, came in with a baseball bat to rob him. And when they robbed him, it went wrong, and he ended up killing him. Well, the guy had stab wounds on his back and baseball, beats to the face and the head and everywhere else. So 2 weapons used in that particular one. They finally found the clothing that for the first time in 24 years, somebody actually took a look at this year and realized that there's clothes that fit Justin Sneed, and then there's clothes that fit a small person, such as a female. And Justin Sneed, when they asked him about it 24 years ago, why there were 2 sets of clothes, he said, oh, I wore both. So you wore 2 different sizes of clothes, and they just bought it. They didn't look into it any further. They didn't investigate it. This entire investigation that put this guy on death row took 10 days. That's it. 10 days. And now he's been on death row for 24 years. He never had a police ticket prior to that. And Richard had all the money that was in Barry Van Treest's vehicle, $30-some thousand, 27-some thousand, somewhere in there, a large amount of cash was in Richard's hands earlier in the day. And Richard literally handed him a large chunk of that. If he really wanted the money, all he had to do was get in his vehicle and drive off. He didn't have to kill anybody. He didn't have somebody kill him so that he could take half of the money. I mean, the whole thing just doesn't make sense when you look at it.
So we do have a process, and we just saw this with Julius Jones, where you said, well, we created this pardon and parole board to kind of take the heat off the governor, but really, it's still one guy who gets to make this call. Am I wrong? It's one guy who gets to decide life or death.
One guy, and he cannot say that they're innocent, get them out of jail. All he can do is take them down 1 level by law.
Clemency.
So in Richard's case, all he could do is say, we're not going to put him to death, but now he gets life in prison with or without parole. He can make that call. Same thing with Julius Jones. Can't really take him off. You can put him in life in prison. And so really what I want, I had a bill last year that would have created an investigative unit to look into both sides of the evidence, right? Is it possible for us to go through the Oklahoma legal system and have 2 court trials that both say you're guilty and for you to be innocent? Is it possible? Anytime humans are involved in any part of the process, it's absolutely possible. And in Richard's case specifically, he had a terrible attorney the very first time, so bad that they did give him a second trial and said he was terrible. The first attorney tried to commit suicide later on because he realized he did such a poor job for Richard. And so he admitted it. The second time, he got a decent, I'd say a halfway decent attorney. And you've got to remember the environment back then. We had a DA that wanted to be known as the death penalty king of the world. I mean, he just wanted to be known as that. And he would go in and lay his Bible and his pistol up on the podium. And he was just one of these guys that had this air about him. And his goal was to get death convictions. That was it. Out of his convictions, you remember we had Gilcrease, which was a lady that worked within the OSBI, who was falsifying DNA evidence so that they could increase the number of death penalties. When they finally found her out, they overturned 8 death penalty convictions based on evidence. So these guys were sitting in jail. The families who lost a family member hated these guys that were sitting in jail, thinking they were the ones that committed murder because they had this proof, right? And yet they were innocent. and they were let go. And there's been books by John Grissom written about those particular cases in Ada and other places. So it is possible. And during that same era is when Richard came through. And all I'm saying, I'm asking the Attorney General and the governor, let's have a third party pull all the evidence on the table and take a look at this case before we put them to death, because they deserve it.
So what is our freshly minted Attorney General and our governor telling you? What has their response been, or have they?
The governor right now is in a place that I don't expect him to comment on this one at all until it goes through pardon and parole, because that's kind of the process. The Attorney General that we have now, I know him. I've known him personally for a number of years now, 6-7 years in the business community. We've been around each other in business associations, things like that. I know him as a fair man, and he's told me the exact same thing you said at the very first. I would rather a guilty man go free than an innocent man to die. And so he is willing to look into this, and I've got a package that I've delivered to him yesterday, and that will show him what was not done in the investigation before. 10 days worth of an investigation. Here's the people who weren't interviewed. Here's the people that weren't asked questions. Here's the evidence that wasn't looked at. The money that they ended up finding in Barry Van Tree's trunk, 16 of the $100 bills had blue ink on them, which means they came from a bank robbery at some point in time. Nobody asked questions. They turned all that money over to his wife and never asked the question of, where did this money come from? Who else might have wanted to kill this guy?
It's crazy. So the Dr. Phil show, is this going to blow the lid off this case? I mean, because I'm going to sit here and tell you, Representative McDugle, I've heard most of this stuff has been out there for years.
Yeah.
Years. And this guy's still on death row. Nothing's happened. So I don't know if Dr. Phil, moves the needle on this or not, but I spoke with Don Knight about this last year.
Yes.
He's what is he? Was he the attorney, or is he the
attorney?
Okay.
He's the lead attorney, volunteer attorney, by the way, over 5,000 hours. So
to try to keep what many people believe is a completely innocent man, from getting murdered by the state of Oklahoma. And he's already spent a couple days. I mean, there is no putting this guy's life back together, no matter what happens next, right?
No, and honestly, I'm for the death penalty. I always have been. If you have somebody who rapes a 2-year-old child, slices their throat, puts them in a shallow grave, we've got to have an option for that particular individual. But my fight here, honestly, is simply because I don't think anybody else is going to fight for him. And so I had to take a stand when it came on my plate. I couldn't just pass it off or pass it by. And it's not politically popular. I'm not gaining political points by doing that.
I'm sure, not in Oklahoma.
Exactly. And I'm doing this because I fully believe that this guy is innocent. And it's blood on our hands as Oklahomans. It's our taxpayer dollars, each and every individual in the state of Oklahoma. It's our dollars that are going to put this guy to death. And I want to make sure the people we put to death are deserving. And I believe that Richard Glossip is not, and possibly Julius Jones.
Well, I will tell you, a lot of folks, and I'm a full confession, I lean towards, throw them in a deep, dark hole for 30 or 40 years and let them suffer for 30 or 40 years. To me, in some ways, death penalty is letting them off easy. And right. I know that not everybody accords with that point of view. I get it, but at least then there's the option 20, 30 years down the line when you find out, oh, whoops, by golly, they didn't do it. There's no takebacks on an execution. There's no mulligans. So, and also it's hella less expensive. Believe it or not, it costs the taxpayer way less money to throw somebody in prison for 20 or 30 years than it does to put them to death, because of all the court cases and all the appeals and all the time that's spent. And here is an example of 20 years down the road, still no execution. So one last question for you, sir. Are we actually physically prepared to do executions again in the state of Oklahoma? Because that's been a problem too.
It has been a problem, and I think the problem that there were multiple problems they had before. Training was a huge issue. They didn't do enough training. The drugs that were used were never verified the way that they should have been verified. So since the last death, I know that we've had change in leadership, we've had change in command, We've got a Department of Corrections now that I believe has gone through the proper training, that is going to be overcautious this time to make sure they get things right and don't have another debacle. So I believe that they are ready, as much as you can be ready to do this. I don't know if mentally you're ever ready. Having been a Marine, I don't know that you're ever ready to take a life, whoever that individual is that has to push that button. So I know they're as ready as you can be in Oklahoma, and I can tell you they're moving forward because we've been stale now for 6 years.
All right, sir. Well, I appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us, and I will certainly be keeping an eye on both of those situations with Mr. Glossip and Mr. Jones. And obviously not a lot I can do about it one way or t'other, except just keep tabs on it and see what happens and kind of hold people's feet to the fire and say, let's please, for the love of everything holy, let's measure twice and cut once before we kill somebody.
Absolutely. And you're more than welcome to come to the watch party at the rooftop in Broken Arrow. 3 o'clock, they're going to have the showing, and we're just inviting anybody in the community that wants to come and be a part of that to come and be a part of it.
Is that on Friday, you said?
It is Friday the 22nd at 3 o'clock at the rooftop in Broken Arrow.
Okay, gotcha. All right, Representative Kevin McDugle, out there advocating for what he believes to be an innocent man on death row in the state of Oklahoma, Richard Glossip. If you'd like to do the Googling, I'm going to tell you there are volumes and volumes of material online. The name spelled Glossip, Richard Glossip, and it's been a crazy case for decades. Thank you very much, sir, for coming on, and let's talk again soon. All right.
Thank you. You have a great day.
You too, brother. Stay safe out there.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.